Welcome to Blueprint Cymru, a podcast intended as a companion to New Wales, where we explore the solutions to how we, the citizens of Wales, can shape our nation's future. You can check out our Engine for Change, sponsor our work, or make suggestions for how change to Wales could come for the better at our website, new.wales. In Blueprint Cymru, we bring together life experiences and perspectives of fascinating individuals who have a story and who have a vision for shaping Wales's future. My name is Simon Hobson. Today's guest is Mark Colbourne, MBE. Mark is a former Paralympic cyclist, renowned for his remarkable journey from a life-threatening injury to achieving gold at the London 2012 Paralympic Games. Mark was brought up in Tredegar. He represented Wales in international volleyball between 1990 and 1993. Then, in 2009, he suffered a near-fatal paragliding accident, resulting in a broken back and lower leg paralysis. Demonstrating extraordinary resilience, he transitioned to paracycling. At the London 2012 Paralympics, Mark won a gold medal in the C1 3-kilometre individual pursuit in the velodrome and silver medals in both the C123 1-kilometre time trial, also in the velodrome, and the C1 road time trial. Shwmai, Mark, it's a pleasure to speak with you.
Hi, Simon. Yes, good afternoon, good evening, or maybe even good night, wherever you are in the world.
Yeah, well, very right. As obviously, I'm in Quebec, so it's first thing in the morning here, and I believe you're in Dubai. Is that correct?
Correct. Yes, we've just passed 5 p.m. in Dubai, so yeah, it's been a wonderful day. Thankfully, some decent sunshine again. So I've been out on the bike this morning. So yeah, very, very grateful, very thankful.
That's great, and both of us obviously being not obvious on my part, but so listener, I'm also a cycling enthusiast. So I've been keeping half an ear and eye on the San Marino bike race,
yes,
which is currently happening. So yeah, perhaps we could go from the beginning then, Mark. Tell us a little bit about your upbringing, please.
Yes, very much so. Well, first of all, thank you. Thank you for inviting me on to your podcast. I appreciate it very much. And obviously, it's a big thanks to technology that, we can have this conversation literally while we're on, opposite sides of the globe almost, So yeah, Mark Colbourne, born and bred in Tredegar in South Wales. And my parents, both Margaret and Cecil, both working class. My mum was a school caretaker for probably 20 years. So, I was grounded to always be at school on time because my mum was always there 2 hours before me, And my dad worked for British Steel, actually for 40 years as a crane driver. And the great story with my dad, he left school on the Friday and I think he was 16 and he literally started working on the Monday. And he literally kept the same job, as a crane driver for 40 years. So I think that's probably very rare, in today's working environment to have the same job from the moment you step out of school to the moment you retire, So yeah, life for me in Tredegar, certainly in the 70s and the 80s, very, very fond memories. The summers tended to last forever back then. And certainly through 1976, which was the hottest summer, into 1977, which was obviously the Queen's Jubilee, was just incredible memories that even to this day, almost 50 years on, I can still remember those incredible celebrations. And as I said, the long summers. So yeah, life was really enjoyable. I suppose freedom is the word that keeps coming back to my mind, of just how much time that we had as kids, and just how much, just how much enjoyment we had, through that freedom,
What did you used to do with that time then when you weren't
I think from a very young age, I think probably from the age of 10, probably from, 1980, when Daley Thompson won his first gold medal, his first decathlon gold medal. I just got hooked on sport. And the one memory that I have was trying to explain to my parents that there was nothing wrong with me. I just loved moving. Because my parents always said, please, Mark, just sit down, But this as as an ex-cyclist, we just love that dopamine feeling. We love the happy drug. We just love movement, And from 1980 right through until 1984, watching Daley Thompson win his second Olympic gold medal, I just got hooked on, sport, health, well-being. And I suppose, as I said, with the freedom that we then had in the 80s and certainly through the 80s into the 90s, I just loved the feeling of movement, training, sport. And yeah, we're talking 40 odd years later, I'm still doing it,
So where did that influence for sport and being aware of sport come from? Because if your parents, were working and they obviously didn't, from what you've just told me, didn't seem to be sporting people themselves.
Yeah, well, the strange thing is my dad, when he did his national service, 2-year national service in the army, he actually enjoyed running, long distance, sort of, half marathons, at the time. But my dad, like I said, when he came out of national service, basically went straight back into work. So, there was no time for fitness, back then, because even though my dad had a sedentary job, my dad sat on his bum for 40 years operating a crane. My dad was always very healthy, very slim, never overweight. Even though he worked continental shifts, days, afternoons, and nights, I can't imagine what his sleep pattern must have been like, to think about it now. And maybe that was the stress test that he had on his body that technically kept him slim all his life, And certainly my mum never did sport. My mum obviously, as I said, was a school caretaker. So my mum spent 20 years cleaning floors, So I think that the sporting element, even speaking to Professor Steve Peters when I was, based in Manchester with British Cycling.
Yeah, of chimp paradox fame.
Yes, the famous chimp paradox. He even said to me the same question, where did this love for movement come from? And I said, I don't know. The only thing I can probably point the finger to is being an only child, in the 70s and the 80s, and not having anybody fend for me or look after me or look out for me. So I suppose I always had that natural ability to run fast. I was always strong. I probably climbed every tree in Tredegar. And probably fell out of half of them.
Yeah. And nobody ever, in any of your time, have you looked at ADHD or anything like that in yourself?
I think the more I read about it now, okay, because obviously science is so on offer now. We can look into so many different things with science, and maybe there is a hint. There's a tendency there. I feel as a logical human, I suppose I'm one of these people. I can be an overthinker, but at the same time, my late father used to say something that stayed with me ever since I was a kid. You're either early or you're late. and I think that was a great grounding for me as a kid. Okay. And as a logical thinker, as somebody who is astute and in control of themselves, I think maybe, I suppose if you want to take a really deep dive into it, there's probably some small signs of ADHD to a certain degree, but it's not a serious, I don't see it as an illness. I see it as a value. I actually see it as a as a part of Mark that has put him in good stead, if I'm honest, so
Yeah, well, as someone that also lives with ADD and autism, and a stepson who is twice exceptional autism, ADHD, I think the awareness it wasn't there for our generation, as it were. I mean, I'm maybe a generation younger than yourself, but it's growing up in the 80s and 90s. But even now, people are still struggling to really accept it, aren't they, in the professional and educational world, at least from my experience with my stepson. So tell us a little bit about how you went from just being a child running around everywhere and enjoying movement to ending up representing Wales in international volleyball, please.
Yeah, well, it goes back to 1980 again, because I remember, watching Daley Thompson on the TV win his gold medal. And at the time, I'd started playing football, rugby, cricket, swimming, just general sport, in Tredegar. And I remember saying to my dad, how come this guy is so good at 10 events? Okay, because he could throw, he was an incredible thrower, incredible runner. He could jump, he could sprint, he did it all, And I said to my dad, how come this guy is so good, Dad? And he said, well, he eats all his greens, he drinks lots of water, and he goes to bed really early. And I thought to myself, really? Okay.
Big parental thing to say.
Yeah. So now I loved my dad unconditionally, okay? And I trusted him unconditionally. But I thought to myself, well, maybe Dad's just saying that because I didn't like cabbage. I didn't like sprouts, okay? I literally grew up on chicken, pasta, and chocolate. So when Daley Thompson won his second gold medal in 1984, I suddenly thought to myself at the age of 14, hang on, I think my dad has cracked the code on how to win an Olympic gold medal. So I started living a healthy life, okay? Because I've always been a chocoholic, okay? And British Cycling knew this. British Cycling knew this literally the week I started there, okay? So I started focusing on my diet, thinking, well, the more food I eat, the more energy I'll have, surely, But that was not the case, So when I started in Cross Keys College when I was 18, 19, and, spent 2 years there, studying sports science, and fell in love with volleyball, because I'd played rugby for a long time. I had a Welsh rugby trial when I was 16. It didn't work out for whatever reason. And I loved all of the general sports that we played, back in the 80s and 90s, And I just loved two things about volleyball: the teamwork, okay, and just the explosive power that you could express when you actually hit that ball, And I remember going to Abersychan Leisure Centre and meeting the Welsh volleyball coach, a wonderful gentleman called Alan Walbioff, and speaking to Alan, about maybe just playing volleyball for Wales, representing my country, And he said, well, just focus on the skills. Come and join us in Abergavenny in the local club, and let's just see where it goes, So there was no pressure, and it was great fun. I truly, truly loved it. The training, and certainly then playing in, the English Volleyball League with Abergavenny. And then literally a year later, Alan said, well, come along, and maybe, we'll see how you get on. And remember, I was like 18, I think I was 17, 18, or 18 actually, yeah. And I'm playing in the British Volleyball Finals in Weston-super-Mare was the first place. The second place was in Sophia Gardens in Cardiff. And then the third was actually in Scotland, in Glasgow, in a place called the Kelvin Hall, which is, the International Sports Centre in the centre of Glasgow. So, it was just an amazing experience to represent my country, even though technically it was just a hobby. It was just a hobby. But loved it. Absolutely loved the experience. Good memories.
So you studied sports science.
Yes.
And you took up the volleyball as a hobby, and you just happened to have that gift that took you to representing Wales. And so, what was your intention to go, where with the sports science?
So the sports science approach for me was to become a PE teacher, to actually go on, and help. I suppose you could almost call it giving back, because at that point I'd spent probably the best part of 8 or 9 years in competitive sport, all different types of sport, and unfortunately, I didn't get A levels, so I couldn't go on to a university to do a degree. So I guess the door just closed on me, and then I got married, at the age of 21, and just started working, just sort of that dream. Thinking back now, that dream almost dissipated, but the passion never left me, even though the dream, I suppose, stopped to become a PE teacher. The feeling of health, well-being, sport, activity, and helping others. This is the important thing here, Simon, is helping other people to improve and become better,
Absolutely. So then you were paragliding, is that correct? And in 2009, when you had the accident that resulted in you breaking your back. So how come you were paragliding?
So I suppose the gap in between, and these are just the three sort of parts of the story. When I got married at 21, I started working as a stained glass designer. Now this blows people away, okay? Because you would never think an Olympic gold medalist is creative, okay? But I've had a creative passion and a creative brain ever since I was a kid, okay? And I loved the opportunity to design, project manage, even manage people, in ending up being a works manager or a general manager for a company. And then, 14, 15 years later, my ex-wife and I just decided to part company. And that's when 2006, 2007, I moved to Cardiff, to St Mellons. I was racing triathlon. I was a keen rock climber, because I just had the time, to really go and enjoy, the sports that I loved. And one of the sports that I suppose took a big passion for me was paragliding, because I always wanted that Peter Pan feeling. I always wanted that moment for my feet to leave the floor and just experience weightlessness, So then in 2009, we were flying with the club that I was part of, from Blaenavon, actually, in South Wales. And we were flying above Rhossili, in the Gower Peninsula.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that afternoon, I flew into what they call a crosswind. So, you can't see it, you can't feel it, but it's there. And it just basically blew out my canopy. So I literally had a full collapse about 40 feet above the grass. And I can still see the grass coming up now. Within 2 seconds, I could just, feel and hear this almighty thud, which was my feet, hitting the floor. And I got dragged for about, 90 or maybe 100 meters, by the canopy. And just remember staring up at the blue sky, that afternoon, in no pain, which was a bit weird. And then just thinking to myself, oh my gosh, that was so close, And then when I looked down my body at both of my legs, which were twisted like pipe cleaners, and I thought to myself, oh dear, I've done something pretty serious, because my legs shouldn't look like that, and they were just wrapped around each other. And within probably 1 or 2 minutes, I just thought, I need to stay still. I need to stay still because I can't feel my legs. There's no movement. There's no feeling below the waist. And if I pass out, I need to be lying on my side so I don't vomit and then end up choking. So I tried to put myself.
You were that aware of thinking through those.
100%, because I'm fully conscious, but I'm just totally paralyzed from my waist down. And the first thought was, I need to pull in the lines, okay, because I'm attached to the harness. So I just thought, well, if I unclip, okay, I'll just unclip myself and just let the canopy blow away. Because the last thing I wanted was to be dragged another 100 meters, And I unclipped, and I'll never forget trying to put myself into the recovery position, being fully cognitive. And I literally couldn't turn myself. And I thought, I must be stuck on something. I must have caught my jacket on something. But what I didn't realize was that the severity, of the accident had just paralyzed me, below the waist. So one of the guys who saw me crash came down, landed, and radioed straight away for the air ambulance, and the Wales air ambulance turned up, honestly, Simon, within about 10 or 11 minutes, and I'll never forget lying on the floor, staring up at the blue sky, because it was a beautiful sunny day, in May 2009. And I'll never forget listening to the helicopter, coming in. You could just hear that. And the guy who was, by my side said to me, Mark, you're going to be okay. The helicopter's here. And then for probably 1 hour, they worked on me, stabilized me with morphine, attached obviously the neck collar, and then, carefully placed me onto the spinal board because they didn't know what I'd done, But I think the paramedic had a pretty good idea, And then I got airlifted off to Morrison Hospital, and I had an X-ray and an MRI. And then that night, I got told that unfortunately I'd broken my back. I'd broken T12, which is sort of around belly button level, and I had a huge thoracic fracture. So I had 6 titanium pins, inserted into my spine, which I've still got them there today, and just thought, well, this is probably the end of my life. Lying in that hospital bed, no movement, no feeling, just thinking, well, this is probably the end, And then 94 days on my back, just lying there, motionless, just letting Mother Nature, take its course, because you can't do anything. You can't fast forward or accelerate the process. You just have to be patient, And I think going back to what you said earlier on, about being a child with no brothers or sisters, I've always enjoyed my own company, and I suppose I've always embraced peace and quiet. So when you spend 94 days on your back, it was okay. I know that sounds a bit crazy, but because I was in no pain, there was no danger, I just relaxed. It was 94 days of meditation.
Do you think, because it sounds like your father, with his work and his shift system, he had a great deal of mental fortitude to be able to deal with that and to know that was the process he had to go through to, sustain his family. Do you think that's something that you've been gifted with as well, to have that strength of mind?
100%. And I'll tell you why. Because my father was known as Mr. Nice Guy. Okay. He was a brilliant snooker player. Okay. You may not know this name, or you may know this name, I don't know, but it was a very famous snooker player from Tredegar called Ray Raden. Okay. And Ray Raden won the world championships many, many times. Okay. I think like maybe 10 times or something. Okay. And Ray won the senior regional championships, and my dad won the junior championships. Okay. I think my dad was probably, I don't know, 10 years or 8 years younger than Ray Raden, But my dad was almost a snooker prodigy, but he never pursued it, as I said, because he ended up, working in the steelworks and doing his national service. And Ray Radin went on to win 10 world championships,
Wow.
But I think those values, were definitely instilled into me at a young age, with lots of patience, because the patience came from having lots of love. Certainly from my parents, unconditional love. Okay, and the reason being, and I don't mind, I don't mind sharing this, because when I was growing up, my parents spoilt me as a kid. Okay, I didn't ask for anything, but they provided everything. Okay, and I just thought, well, maybe that's just how parenthood is. Okay, maybe everybody gets everything done for them, But the reason being is that in 1964, my mother unfortunately miscarried with 2 girls, with twins. Okay. So by the time then I was born in 1969, they didn't know, my parents didn't know they could have any more kids. So for 4 or 5 years, you can imagine, they've lived through that trauma of miscarriage. My mum didn't think she could have any more kids. So when I turned up, I was almost like the golden child, this sort of, this miracle has finally, appeared. So you can imagine, through the 70s and the 80s, how much love and attention and care, they gave me, So fast forward, 30 years to when I was 40 and I fall out of the sky. You can imagine, both my parents turned up that night in the hospital. My mother's just crying, uncontrollably, and she's crying, and obviously I'm crying, trying to explain that, I broke my back, but I'm okay. And my dad, and I'll never forget this. My dad leaned over and he put his hand on my shoulder and he said, I told you, careful, didn't I? And I'm like, Dad, now is not the time. Now is not the time to give me a roasting, So, but obviously he was worried, he was worried. So the 6 months in hospital, in Rookwood Hospital in Cardiff, was traumatic, but at the same time, a very cathartical experience. Being nursed by the NHS, 24 hours a day for 6 months, was a moment and an experience that I'll be forever grateful, And the strange part of the story is that the gentleman who founded the NHS, which is Aneurin Bevan, was from Tredegar. So you suddenly think, well, how grateful am I that the local Labour politician from Tredegar, who founded the service that technically saved my life, it certainly saved my sanity, because if I'd had broke my back in, I don't know, the deepest, darkest jungle somewhere, I'd probably still be there now,
Yeah.
So yeah, very grateful.
Absolutely. That's, I can't obviously start to imagine that process of going through that sort of experience and the trauma, and then finding the mental strength to get yourself back together.
Because the worst thing is, Simon, the worst thing is the human brain, from my experience and my studies, the human brain will give up before the body will give up. Now remember, I was in hospital. Thankfully, I wasn't in any pain. I was just motionless. And certainly after about, I don't know, 4 months probably, I can't remember, maybe 4 months, I started thinking about euthanasia. I started thinking about, well, how do I get out of this situation? How do I change it? Because I don't know if I can continue being in this state, And my father caught hold of me one night by the scruff of my neck, and I'll never forget this. And he was crying, I was crying. And he said, please stop. Stop. because you're going to get through this. Okay. I was like, Dad, I broke my back. How the hell am I going to get through this? Because I couldn't see further than the next day. So technically I was in a really deep emotional state of depression, you know? And he said, Mark, listen, you're going to get through this because you're a winner. Are you listening? And do you know what, Simon? That was the one piece of advice that totally changed, you know, the future of my life, you know? So yeah, it was definitely a turning point, you know? Yeah.
And so how long was it between that conversation with your father before you had that moment in your brain and your head and you said to yourself, right, I'm going to do something with my life and I'm going to do something extraordinary?
Well, in the beginning, there was no thoughts of extraordinary. You know, in the beginning, the first thoughts was, I'm alive, because, you know, life could have been much worse, because technically I could have ended up in a cemetery in Ebervale. You know, I could have ended up in a cemetery. So the first feelings was gratitude, you know, and I suppose then certainly over the last 2 months in hospital, when I started to walk with crutches, you know, I started going to the gym, just doing exercises based on walking, you know, with crutches and a walking frame. And I kept thinking, well, this situation isn't very good, but it's much better than where I was 2 months ago, or 3 months ago, or 4 months ago, you know? So when I left hospital, after 6 months, the first thing I did, and this is no word of a lie, I think it was in month 2 after I'd left hospital, I went back to the gym. So you can imagine my parents, they're like, are you okay? And I'm like, listen, I need to get myself strong again, because, you know, through atrophy, I'd lost all my muscle strength, all my muscle density, all my fitness, you know. I need to get myself fit and strong if I'm going to go back to work, okay? Because walking around on crutches with lower leg paralysis was tiring, you know, was really exhausting, you know. So my dad was like, okay, just be careful, okay? And my mum was like, yeah, you know, he's always the same. So the strange part of the story was, I started cycling in the velodrome in Newport with Disability Sport Wales. And I had an amazing coach called Neil Smith. And Neil had coached disabled riders before they joined British cycling. So Neil was almost like a talent scout. Okay. And I'll never forget, I've even got a picture on my phone. I'll have to send you the picture of meeting Neil for the very first time. And I'm on crutches. So I goes in, meets Neil, explained about my disability, explained that I've raced triathlon, explained that I've been riding a bike since I was about 7 or 8, you know. So cycling was not a problem, it was easy, just doing it with a disability. So Neil said these words to me, and this is quite comical for you, you know, for your audience, okay? He said, okay, I'll go to the, I'll go down to the cage, which is where they kept the bikes, and I'll go and get you a bike, okay? And then you can have a ride around the velodrome on the floor, you know, on the bottom, okay? I said, yeah, okay, that's great, thank you. Because I had my cycling shoes with me and my supports. And he turned up with this bike, and it had stabilizers on it. I said, what have you got there? He said, well, it's your bike, jump on. I said, but it's got stabilizers. He said, yeah, I know. He said, the last thing I need is you falling off, because you've got 6 pins in your back, and 10 months ago or 9 months ago, you broke your back. I said, I'm not getting on a bike with stabilizers. It's embarrassing. He said, well, you've got 2 choices. You either jump on or you go home. I said, okay, I'll jump on. So I literally jumped on, clipped in, and literally they just pushed me around the Côte d'Azur, around the bottom of the velodrome, you know. And And it was a very cathartical moment for me for this reason. And you know this as a cyclist, okay? When I'm cycling, I don't feel disabled. When I step off the bike and I've got this Charlie Chaplin walk, with lower leg paralysis, it was an incredible feeling that I'll never forget, okay? So I went to the velodrome every week, every Saturday, 2 hours with Neil, and just riding. And after about 4 or 5 weeks, they took the stabilizers off. You can imagine that moment, okay? I was like, oh my gosh, this is a breakthrough. So all those feelings of depression, the mental health struggle, I'm disabled, I'm going to be disabled for the rest of my life. All those feelings started to dissipate, okay? So after about 3 or 4 months of just riding in the velodrome, Neil said something to me one day, and I'll never forget. He said, oh, we've got an international race in about 3 months' time. Would you like me to enter you, into the races? I was like, yeah. I was like, yeah, 100%. He said, okay, I'll stick your name down, and you'll be racing against people from Brazil, Germany, France, Belgium, maybe about 7 or 8 countries, okay, in Newport. And I won the kilo, which is 4 laps of the velodrome, and I won the pursuit, which is 12 laps of the velodrome. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, hang on, this is 12 months after I broke my back, and I'm winning cycling races. This is crazy, okay? So to finish the story, I put both of the awards that I won, which are like plates, okay, metal plates. I stuck it on Facebook, as you do. And within about 3 hours, the paramedic who treated me rang me because I'd exchanged phone numbers. We became really close friends because this guy, like I said, technically saved my life, And he rang me up. He said, mate, I've just seen on Facebook you won these events. Well done. I'm really proud of you, He said, I'm really made up for you. I said, thank you. Much appreciated. He said, what are you doing in 6 weeks' time? I said, nothing. I just rehabilitation and just general fitness and a bit of cycling. And he said, well, why don't you come along for a charity bike ride with the Wales Air Ambulance? We're cycling around Wales in a week. Now, as you know, Wales is not flat.
There's a bit of difference between riding around Wales and going around a velodrome.
Exactly. I said, Ross, I'm in. Okay, you guys saved my life. The least I can do is raise some money for the organization. I'm in, 100%. Count me in. And they had all these famous rugby players, athletics, people turn up. Just probably about 20 famous people, And I'll never forget meeting Colin Jarvis, the Welsh rugby captain. And I had a great chat to Colin about my accident and, my disability, but I could cycle, And I'll never forget on the very first day we arrived in new.wales because we were staying in the rugby clubs, overnight. And I met this chiropractor, and I'd never met this guy before. And he said, what's wrong with your legs, fella? So I explained, broke my back, lower leg paralysis. So we had this great conversation, about 20 minutes. And at the end, I said, who are you? Because I didn't know who he was. And he said, my name is Dr. Ben Matthews. I'm a chiropractor from Cardiff. He said, but I need to ask you a question. I said, yeah, of course. He said, are you training for the London 2012 Paralympic Games? I said, no. Why the hell would I do that? I was 41 years of age. I knew the games were 2 years away, And he said, I think you should. I think you should seriously take a look and consider maybe, just maybe get into London 2012 to represent, Paralympics GB. And I'll never forget Simon going home that week after raising, I think we raised about 20 grand for the air ambulance, okay? It was 520 miles in a week around Wales. Honestly, mate, I think I slept for 3 days. Almost have shattered. But I remember going home and saying to my parents on the Saturday that I'm going to start training for the Paralympics, And my father was like, para what? I said, the Olympics for disabled people. He said, Margaret, have a word with your son. I think he's lost it. Because my dad knew that I don't have a stop button. Okay. And my mother said to me, good luck. What would you like for tea? And that was the start. That was June 2010. And that was the start of the childhood dream, literally just unraveling, 1 month at a time. And just to finish, a big thanks to Neil Smith, the coach, because Neil ran British Cycling and he said, look, we've got this guy. He's a C1 athlete. He's a bit old, but he's really strong. He's got a big engine, and we think you should come and take a look. So British Cycling came down to Newport, and they were like, okay, you have potential, but go away. Do a couple of 1,000 miles of training, and then come back. And that's when the dream really started. It really did.
And you mentioned C1 there. Perhaps explain what that is.
Yeah, definitely. So in paracycling, or cycling, for disabled people, there's 5 categories. Okay. So the classification, or C, okay, for the reference, is C5 is somebody that was born without a hand or no fingers, or maybe they have an amputation through the elbow. Okay, but the rest of their body's fine. Okay, a C4 athlete is somebody that would have an amputation through the leg, normally around the shin level or just below the knee. Okay, C3 could probably be one of 2 types of riders. So you either have somebody with cerebral palsy, okay, because it's a brain dysfunction in terms of an imbalance dysfunction, or a C3 could be an amputation above the knee, okay? And then C2, which is same again, could be somebody with severe cerebral palsy or somebody with one leg, okay? So they just literally ride on one leg. And as a cyclist, if you've ever done one leg drills, it's pretty tough.
Yeah.
And then C1, which is same again, severe cerebral palsy. Somebody with, this will blow you away, one arm and one leg. Okay, there's a rider from Spain. Obviously, your audience can check this guy out. And his name is Jose Mendez. Okay, and Jose Mendez is a double amputee. So he's missing one arm and one leg on the same side. Incredible. Honestly, the guy is phenomenal. And he's a lovely chap. Okay. And obviously, I'm classed as a C1 athlete because I have severe lower leg paralysis. So what does that mean? So both my feet don't work. Okay, so I've got no push or pull in both feet. Both calf muscles don't work. Both hamstrings don't work. And both glutes don't work. So technically, 60% of my legs don't work. But the 40% that do work, that weren't affected, is my quads and my hip flexors. So that means when I'm clipped in with my cycling shoes, I can actually push and pull on the pedals with my quads and my hip flexors. So it's an incredible feeling, and it took me, I'd say, about a year and a half to really start to master the fluidity, of pedaling. And then when I joined British Cycling, they taught me how to pedal in squares, because of the transition of power on the time trial bike, or, in the velodrome, in the pursuit. So I almost rewrote the history books with British Cycling, because I'll never forget the physiologist saying to me the first week, what the hell are we going to do with you? And I said, well, I don't know, but let's have a good go, So yeah, so that was the start, really, to join British Cycling, and just feel, I just felt that every door that was opening was the right door. you know.
And then, so the Paralympics came around in 2012, and you won gold in the 3 kilometre individual pursuit. And so, you know, was there more to it other than doing a lot of training and getting selected? And
yeah, well, you know, as a as an ex-pro cyclist, that there's much more to the work off the bike that helps you when you're on the bike. Okay, so yes, the training was 26, 27 hours a week. Okay, various different intensities. Okay, some weeks were more difficult than others. Some weeks were quite light, but you need those recovery rides. You need the deload weeks. 4 hours in the gym doing strength work, ab work, certainly lots of quad work as well. And then the diet and lifestyle. And the diet and lifestyle for me was great because I'd already done it for 25 years. So I didn't have a problem with somebody, as in the nutritionist, telling me what to eat, when to eat, how much to eat. So when the coaches explained why I needed to do things, I just said, okay, who am I to question one of the best coaches in the world at any one of those verticals, whether it's physiology, biomechanics, nutrition, strength coaches, okay? And I just became really coachable. And that was the difference, okay? And I suppose the icing on the cake was Professor Steve Peters. Because
I was going to ask you about him, how much work he did mentally.
Incredible. So if you think of this for your audience, okay? In my category, in the Paralympics, there were 14 riders, okay? 13 including me, 14 riders. We all trained probably about the same, 25, 26 hours a week. Some people had slightly faster bikes, more aerodynamic, okay? Slightly more aerodynamic helmets. I would say we probably ate different foods because somebody in China is probably going to eat different foods to Mark in Manchester, okay? But my point is that when we get to the games, everybody's in the best condition they can be, okay? Because it's not a rehearsal. You can't say after London, can I have another go?
Especially not at the age you were at.
Exactly, okay? So what's my point? My point is, when you're competing in an event that's only going to happen once, okay, you have to be prepared to give it 100%, because you can't give it 105%, because that doesn't exist. You can only give your best, okay? I was 18 years older than the guy who I raced against in the final, okay? He was probably, excuse me, he was probably 10 kilos lighter than me, okay? So the odds were against me, okay? So where's the marginal gains, okay? Where's the small differences that can make all the difference? And every time I watch that video back of the final, okay, that guy, the gentleman's name is Yang Zi. In my opinion, he'd lost that race in lap 2 out of 12, okay? Because when he came around on lap 2, the first thing he did was to look across the track. What does that tell me? Okay? He's wondering, where's the guy? Where's the guy? He's nervous, okay? I got on that track and I looked at one thing and one thing only, which was the black line, okay? The pursuiter's line. And that's all I looked at. Because on that track that day, there was only me. There was no other rider in my head. It was just me against the clock, okay? Because if you empty your head of any emotional stress, you can focus on the process, not the outcome, you know? And that's a big thanks to Professor Steve Peters, because I'd never been to an Olympics before. I didn't know what to expect. Okay. To me, it was just another 12 laps around the track, but giving it 100%. And obviously, on the day of the final, you race in the morning, as you know, in qualification, and then 4 hours later, you do it again. So I had to hold a little bit back in the morning. And then in the final, after 10 laps, you just basically empty the tank, you know? And I'll never forget coming around on lap 10, I think it was, lap 9 into lap 10. And as I'm on the skis and I'm looking up the track, and I could just see the rider about 80 meters in front of me. And I was like, oh my gosh, he shouldn't be there. And then into lap 10, into 11, I'm 50 meters behind him. And then lap 11 into lap 12, I'm 20 meters behind him. And I could even feel the slipstream on my face. That's how close I was. And I'll never forget that moment, you know, crossing, you know, the finish line and just hearing the gun going off for the end of the race and looking up at the scoreboard, you know, and there was no time. It just said WR, world record. I was like, oh my gosh, that's unbelievable, you know.
I hadn't realised you'd got the world record at the time as well. Yeah.
You know, it was crazy. You know,
that's phenomenal. Yeah. Well, you mentioned there, because obviously this podcast is looking at your experience and how you can transfer your knowledge and your experience into, I guess, advising or idealising the future for Wales as a nation. And you mentioned a couple of things there, which I'd like to focus on. One of them was you were training before the Olympics in Manchester. And obviously, British Cycling's based in Manchester. Was there ever a moment where you felt some sadness that you were competing as Great Britain rather than Cymru or Wales?
Yeah, and I think, you know, that's certainly something that goes through people's minds, and it certainly went through, you know, my mindset, because obviously with the Paralympics, you're representing, you know, the 4 nations technically, okay, but I know with the Commonwealth Games, the tandems, you know, where you have 2 cyclists on one bike, and obviously the rider behind is blind or visually impaired, and that cycle race, you know, is in the Commonwealth Games. So it's a shame that there's no other cycling, you know, events for disabled people, you know, whether it's track racing or whether it's time trialing, doesn't matter, because, you know, if you're in the velodrome and you're representing Wales in the Commonwealth Games, technically, if you're going to have the able-bodied athletes, well, in my opinion, you may as well have, you know, disabled athletes as well, you know, because it's a great, there's 2 big benefits, in my opinion, okay? It's a great spectacle for the crowd, okay, to see somebody, for instance, who has a disability, whether it's an arm disability, a leg disability, or maybe a vision disability, it doesn't matter, because it inspires that generation, you know, and that was the strapline, you know, from London 2012, to inspire a generation. But can you imagine, you know, representing Wales in a cycling event in the Commonwealth Games? How many people in Wales are going to be truly inspired, you know, from seeing a local chap from Tredegar, you know, who's been through hell and back, to suddenly, you know, ride the velodrome? In my opinion, I think it would be a great spectacle. You know, I really, really do. And many other sports, not just cycling, because you have shot putting in the Commonwealth Games. You've got Aled Sean Davis, you know, from South Wales, who competed in the Commonwealth Games. You know, Aled won gold, you know, in the shot put in the Paralympics. He's a Paralympic athlete competing in the Commonwealth Games for Wales, you know. So it's a great spectacle, you know, for certainly the Commonwealth Committee, to really have a think about the bigger picture, you know.
There's a couple of bits there I'd quite like to explore your opinion on and views on. You know, one of them is, would you go as far as saying that, well, the Olympics should have, you know, England, Wales, Scotland, Northern Ireland teams, and the other is with the Commonwealth Games. Take your views of, you know, how it's good to elucidate the abilities of individual athletes from the nations in the Commonwealth Games. But have you an opinion of the Commonwealth Games themselves? Because obviously they're a vestige of empire, really, aren't they? And there are feelings across the world, Australia, New Zealand, you know, less keen on hosting them now.
Yeah. So think of the first question, you know, it's like the British Lions, okay, where you bring the best of the best together, okay, and certainly representing Paralympics GB, you know, I suppose Paralympics GB could have selected any one of 3 or 4 different athletes, you know, to represent, you know, Great Britain at the home games, okay. I suppose, thankfully, you know, they picked me. And thankfully, I was from Wales, you know. And I think the second question is, it's always a difficult one, because most people don't know how much cost is involved to put an athlete forward for a Commonwealth Games, for instance, and how much time, money, infrastructure, support really goes into, I suppose, preparing that athlete for that one moment in time. Okay, you know, I was with British Cycling for 18 months before I went to the games. The first 6 months was almost as an academy rider, okay, racing, you know, around Europe, and, you know, we raced in Canada as well. But British Cycling said to me, look, we're going to take a gamble with you, you know. They don't select bronze or silver medalists, but what they do select is potential gold medalists, because they take you from good to great. Okay, I had all the attributes. I couldn't do anything about my age. That was what it was, you know. But what I did have was the biological fitness. You know, basically my chronological age was, when I raced in London, was 42, but my biological age was probably 30. You know, because I was, and I've said this on stage, Simon, okay, I didn't win my gold medal with great luck. I won it with great health, because I was super healthy, you know. And then all the fitness, the training, and all of the advice on how to become, you know, an incredible bike rider, you know, athlete, whatever you want to call it, you know. So that's all the additional extra information. But I think it's a tough call, because there's so many global events going on, okay, at any one time around the world, almost every year now, you know. It's a difficult one, you know, to really put your finger on what's the benefits of a Commonwealth Games versus, you know, having more Paralympic athletes involved in the Commonwealth Games. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think so when I can see where you're going with, we need to have more exposure of Paralympics and the whole aspect of I guess where I was trying to go with the question was, it sounds like you had the help you needed. In some ways, you know, your talent was found. There are many people that have talent and they aren't found. And I guess where I'm going with my question is asking you, what do you think could be done in Wales to make sure that more people like yourself, or anybody that picks up, like your dad, who picked up snooker and then had to put it down because of the practicalities of life. He could have been, a world-class snooker player. How does one put the structures in place so that people like that with those talents don't slip through and are lost?
I think that's a great question, and there's a very simple answer. Okay, in my opinion, it's luck. Okay, because the infrastructure is in place. I know Disability Sport Wales have community officers in, I'm sure, all of the regions in Wales, who help the local community to find those, I suppose, find the talent, but most of the talent probably don't know it's available. They don't know that there's a community officer there as a talent scout. Does that make sense? Okay, because, and I'm only going to share this from my experience, having been disabled at the age of 40. Okay, I didn't know anything about Paralympic sport because I'd never been, I suppose, exposed to disabled people, for instance. Okay, I'd never been exposed to certainly the pathway of Paralympic sport. Okay, and I almost found Neil Smith by chance, and that was down to luck. Okay, and the luck was the very last month I was in hospital, in Rookwood Hospital in Llandaff in Cardiff. In the university in Cardiff, in Newark, every year they have what they call a wheelchair spectacular. Now, the wheelchair spectacular is an invitation for anybody who has a disability of any age to come along and just participate in any one of the Paralympic sports. Okay, it's a free event for the day, and there's about 700 people turn up. Okay, so it's a huge event. So I got invited by the physiotherapist in Rookwood Hospital, and the guy, I was still in my wheelchair. True story. Okay, the guy's name is Martin. Martin said, "Oh, next week we're going up to the university to the wheelchair spectacular. Would you like to come along?" I said, "Yeah, okay." I'd been stuck in hospital for 5 months. I just wanted to get out and just experience something else, So we turned up, and I'll never forget pushing myself in my wheelchair into the big hall. And you can imagine now, there's rowing machines in there. There's bows and arrows for archery. There's pistols. There's rifles for shooting. Okay. There's wheelchair basketball, wheelchair table tennis, wheelchair. I was like, oh my gosh, this is my environment, And I'll never forget meeting a guy. Unfortunately, this guy's passed away now, a gentleman called Anthony Hughes. And Anthony Hughes was part of Disability Sport Wales. Okay. And Anthony was in a wheelchair. I think he won bronze in Athens. I think he was in the shot put or maybe the discus in the Paralympics. Okay. And he pushed himself up to me in his wheelchair. He put his hand on my shoulder. He said, "Excuse me." He said, "What have you done before, big fella?" I said, "Sorry," because I was 95 kilos. I was 10 kilos heavier than I am now. Okay. And he said, you don't get shoulders like that, sitting on the sofa." So I explained rock climbing, triathlon, paragliding, all the sports that we did in South Wales, in school and college. And he said, "Do you fancy having a go at rowing?" I said, "Sorry." He said, "Do you fancy having a go at rowing?" Because they had the concept 2 rowers. Okay.
Yeah.
I said, "Well, I'm not sure because I broke my back 5 months ago." And he was like, no, you'll be fine. Come on. So they literally put me onto this concept 2 rower. Okay. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, I need to be careful here because my pin's in my back, And they strapped my feet in. Okay. And I literally started to pull on the, on the the handle, you know. And Anthony said to me, "You got potential there, fella." And I was like, "Well, I'm not sure because I've just broke my back and I'm just a bit nervous, you know." And he said, "No, you'll be fine. Just keep your back straight. You'll be fine." 3 months later, after leaving hospital, I won the indoor rowing championships in Cardiff.
Did you?
Okay. And I'll never forget, because at the time I'd started rowing and I started cycling. And I said to Neil Smith, the coach, I said, "Look, you know, rowing's great, but it doesn't really fire me up. You know, I'd rather be out riding my bike." So he said, "Okay, just leave the rowing." And I did, I did. But my point is that it was that moment, that once in a lifetime moment. What if I'd said no to go in to the university?
Well, I was going to say, Mark, I think one of the things that you've highlighted through this conversation is the luck comes from saying yes to everything.
100%.
Having a go.
Yeah, just having a go, and that's why there's a great quote by Michael Jordan, the famous basketball player. And it says, "I can accept failure because everyone fails at something. But what I cannot accept is not trying."
Well, here to that. Of the mindset. And, to maybe segue, it might be a clumsy segue, but to segue from that sentiment into thinking about Wales and its constitutional future and how you would like to see our nation maybe in 2040. What's your aspirations for that?
Yeah, I think over certainly the last 40 years, we've seen unprecedented change in Wales. I saw my father cry when they tore down Ebervale Steelworks. Okay, that was the end of an era. Llanwern Steelworks, almost the end of an era. Between the coal mines, the open cast mines, the pits, the heavy industries, that for me was a catalyst, a turning point in Wales. Many people left, many people left, and yet many people arrived. So I think the first thing for me, and I share that openly, is because we have to accept that change will always happen. Because in Wales for many, many years, probably 80 years, we didn't have change because life was good. We had lots of coal, we had the steelworks, the industries, we had the ports, okay? And life was good, and I suppose that turning point of change for many people, it literally was the nail in the coffin, and people just thought, well, how do we come back from this? Through the service industries, obviously with people moving into Wales, with new skill sets, I suppose promoting, entrepreneurship, and certainly tech, because Wales is a great environment for tech, because I suppose as Welsh people, we are very creative, naturally, very creative, So I think the next sort of 15 years for Wales is going to, we're going to continue to go through that change. It's not going to happen straight away. It hasn't happened over the last 40 years. And I think it's going to take a bit longer before we, as a nation, catch up with the rest of the world. And why do I say that? And why do I feel confident enough to say that? I've been living in Dubai now for the last 3 years. Okay. I moved here for my health. Unfortunately, both my parents have passed away, and the winter in the UK for my body is horrendous because of the spinal cord damage that I've got. and I just needed to get away because of the weather, purposely because of the weather, And having lived in Spain for 6 or 7 months, I lived in Crete for 6 months when I was training for the games. So I knew the benefits of warm weather on my body. And, I'm 55 now. I'm not getting any younger, okay? And I just needed to be in an environment that was kind to my body. And having been here now 3 years, the rest of the world, and I mean this pretty strongly, including Wales, needs to take a look at what's going on in Dubai in terms of the infrastructure, in terms of the investment, in terms of everything that's being done for the people. Now, remember, the 3.3 million people who live in Dubai, okay, 90% of those people are expats. Sheikh Mohammed doesn't have to do what they do for the expats because they're guests, okay? They technically live-in tourists. So why does the country spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of millions of dirham, dollars, pounds, whatever you want to call it, okay, to ensure that those people who do live here can have a quality of life that is expected, okay, and at the same time give back, okay, to ensure that those people are looked after, because it's those people that's putting money in the till. That's a Welsh term, isn't it?
Yeah.
That's giving back, that's putting money into, the actual the process of the whole country, So, and this is not a derogatory comment, it's not a patronizing comment, but I think Wales as a country, we need to play catch up, okay, pretty quick, because places like Dubai, certainly like Saudi, okay, Saudi Arabia, they are moving ahead, I mean, at light speed, okay, at light speed. And that's the only thing that I would love to see in Wales is the acceleration of the basics, okay, opportunities for SMEs, for entrepreneurs, for businesses, and ensure that it's done pretty quick, okay?
Where do you think that comes from? Do you think that comes from Welsh government, government in Westminster? Does the Senate need to have more control, more powers over those type of initiatives?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, because I would love to see, more power and decision making, but at the same time, remember, there's a bigger picture. Being part of the UK. But I know 3 years ago when I left Wales, Wales hadn't changed in 20 years, okay? There was many businesses closed, few businesses that had opened, which is great to see, okay? But not on a mass scale, because there was a mass reduction, in employment and businesses. And yes, there was, some investment into towns, cities, roads, industrial estates, etc. But in my opinion, I'm maybe speaking out the term here because I don't hold the purse strings, okay? But what I do see, certainly here in Dubai, is if there's a new road that's needed to relieve traffic congestion, within 6 months, it's built. And I've seen it, I've experienced it, okay? It's just the speed of change, okay? The speed of change. Now, if in a Welsh economy, the money is continuously coming in, then just use it. Just use it for the future. Use it for the next generation. Don't save money, spend it. Because it's the old analogy, build it and they will come. And I think that's why, unfortunately, just to finish in Wales, we're probably 20 years too late, because the rest of the world, you know, is moving forward at a rate of knots, you know, and yeah, honestly, you know, it breaks my heart, you know, to see Wales not moving forward as quick as the rest of the world. And as I said, I apologize if I'm speaking out of term, because I don't know the technicalities behind it all. But in my opinion, I think that there could be more to be done, you know.
You spoke there and sounded like you are in favour of Wales remaining part of the United Kingdom. But you've also spoken of the lack of progress in Wales over the last 20 odd years. Is there any part of you that thinks that maybe being tied into the United Kingdom is why Wales is not moving forward as rapidly as it could?
Well, I think there's, in my head, there's three answers, okay? I've seen the speed of change happen. I'm not making this stuff up, okay? Because I'm frustrated that Wales is not up there with the rest of the world, okay? And I'll never forget going to Downing Street and meeting David Cameron when we went there. I think it was 2014, 15, I think, maybe, for St. David's Day, okay? And David Cameron openly said, you know, in a private room, there was probably maybe 60 Welsh people in there, that Wales punches well above its weight, okay, which we always will. However, at the same time, because I see here in Dubai things happening at a rate of knots, whether it's technology, whether it's how businesses can be supported, okay, and the infrastructure, okay. And I've said this a few times, you know, that there's no motorway from the M4 to Cardiff Airport. Why? Why is there no, you know, motorway, 4 lanes that can take the HGV lorries, that can transport goods from Wales internationally to export it? Okay? Because that, in my opinion, that's what's missing, because we have incredible businesses in Wales with incredible products, incredible produce, okay, with some very clever, creative people. But they just don't have the door open to export their products, produce around the world, you know. And we see it here in Dubai. You know, there's many, many Welsh companies, okay, who export into Dubai. And it's great to see. It's amazing. It really is. But that's probably only 1%, you know. So give the other 99% the same opportunity, you know, by building the infrastructure to allow them to have that process in place, you know. So should we stay part of the UK right now? Yes. Okay. But at the same time, like I said, I think Wales, unfortunately, and this breaks my heart, I still think we have a long way to go, okay, to be up there with the rest of the world. And I guess here in Dubai, you know, there's 175 nationalities in Dubai, okay, and yet everybody's catered for. Why? Because they've built the infrastructure, okay, they've built the roads, you know, they have the metro, okay, they have the taxi services. So everything has been invested, you know, into the future.
Absolutely. And so for your efforts on the bicycle, you were awarded the member of the most excellent order of the British Empire. Have you ever thought of giving it back?
Well, I think, you know, there's two answers here. people have been awarded, the MBE, OBE, CBE, okay? And because of their political preferences, beliefs, feelings, emotions, they've not wanted that award, okay? And I suppose if you go back through the history of Wales and the reasons why people hand them back, that's their choice, okay? To me, personally, it was an award from the country to say, well done, okay? And that's all it's ever been, because I don't use the MBE for gain, okay? It's just a title. It's just an award, like the gold medal. I've got the gold medal here today, to show you, your audience, for those watching on video.
Yeah,
It's pretty heavy, actually. Is that it's an award to say well done, okay? Congratulations for your efforts. Now, some people can twist their own political opinions and their own views to whatever they want, to suit their needs, okay?
I suppose, Mark, sorry to interrupt you, but I think one of the things that maybe grates with many more people these days is the British Empire aspect of it. It's fair enough, as you highlight, rewarding and awarding people who have done extraordinary and great things and shown the capabilities of individuals, but to be associated with something which is not only dead as a concept as well as a reality, it also now has an awful lot of historically negative baggage with it. And that was the root of my question.
Yeah, and the one thing we can't do is change history, okay? We can formulate history for the future. We can create it. I get that, I really do. And for the last 12 years, my Olympic legacy, my vision, was to help 1 million people to look good, feel great, and be happy, okay? I feel that I'm formulating or creating history for the next generation, okay? Now, some people may say, and I'm just going to use this as a derogatory comment, some people may say, well, we should never have gone to war, okay? We should never have done many, many things in the past, okay? And my view right now is against what was done, okay? So people could say that, of course they could, okay? But we can't change the past, okay? And if I was to give it back, if I was to literally turn up at Buckingham Palace and say, there we go, thanks, bye, would my life change? Probably not, okay? I'm still Mark Colbourne. I'm still Margaret's boy. I'm still helping other people. I'm still giving back to ensure that everything that I've gone through and everything I've achieved can help other people to achieve their dreams, and sometimes even, Simon, just give them hope, okay? Just give them hope. So would my life change if I handed it back? Probably not, if I'm honest. I don't get a discount on my electric bill because I've got an MBE, okay? I don't get food discount. I don't, okay? So it is a part of my life, but it's not everything. It's not all of my life, okay? So I think, just to finish, I respect if other people want to give things back, that's their choice, okay? That's their choice. When they're given a gift for services rendered, that's their choice. Does it make them feel any better? I don't know. I really don't, but it's their personal choice, and I respect that, I respect that,
Thank you. So what's your life today? And you do, I understand from conversations we've had before recording, that you help with training there in Dubai. Do you do training in Wales still, or work with Welsh athletes?
No, and unfortunately, I'm going to say it. Nothing ever came of it, because in 2018, I spoke to Sport Wales, okay, or Sports Wales. I spoke to Disability Sports Wales to show my interest in helping and giving back. You know, having been a Paralympic champion for 6 years at that point, and knowing how the system works, almost knowing what was needed and how I could use my experience from British cycling, from the world-class program. Nobody listened. Okay, nobody listened. And I'm not going to name names because that would be unfair, but nobody listened. Okay, so
why do you think that is, or what's the root cause of that?
I honestly don't know. Okay, I honestly don't know. And I had 4 conversations with 4 different people, and nobody listened. So if nobody's going to listen, I'll just stop talking, and just do my thing. And for me, as a conference speaker, as an international keynote speaker, to date, I've presented at 245 events of various different sizes, from an audience of 50 up to 1,000. Okay, because the FTSE 250 companies that I've presented for and coached know that I've got something to offer. Okay, and unfortunately, some people in certain positions in Cardiff didn't want to listen. Okay, so why, and I'm going to say this, why did Rolls-Royce jet engines in Derby reach out to me in 2018 to present to their senior engineers, 320 of them actually, because they wanted to know, how do you overcome change as a human being? Okay, and to present for Rolls-Royce at their event it was an all-day, what they call an away day, a European away day. And even the vice president of Rolls-Royce jet engines, a lovely gentleman called Luke Mallows, he said to me, thank you. Okay, you've really made an impact today. You've shared incredible information, and I just want to say thank you. This guy's running Rolls-Royce jet engines, and yet somebody in Cardiff didn't want to listen. So what does that prove? That proves to me that sometimes people in positions of responsibility can be narrow-minded because they don't like change, which is frustrating. So yes, as a facilitator here in Dubai, as a leadership coach, plus I'm coaching, people on the bike, just for general fitness and health, so, and I love it,
Have you got conferences or talks lined up ahead in the next months?
So we've got a couple of conferences, certainly now after, we're going through Ramadan here now, in Dubai through March. And then we've got the national holiday, which is called Eid, at the end of March. And then some summer conferences, mostly facilitation, leadership coaching, peak performance coaching, mindset coaching. So plus, like I said, 250K a week on the bike, which is my happy place, so yeah, it's a great place to be. But I still say, just to finish, that people in the Senedd, people in Whitehall, people in London, they need to be taking a look at obviously what's been done here. They really do.
Oh, thanks for your time, Mark. It's been really enjoyable and incredibly inspiring and hopeful for me. I shall certainly call on this memories of this conversation in my say darker moments in the brain.
Yes, definitely. Yes, thank you ever so much appreciated, and good luck to your listeners.
And if people want to follow you, are you on socials and things like that?
Yeah, obviously LinkedIn, you can search for Mark Colbourne. There's not many of us on there. But the strange thing is, just to finish, there's a gentleman that I was coaching on the bike last year in Dubai, and a British guy actually, and his cousin's name is Mark Colborne. I was like, wow, I've never met a Mark Colborne before, you know. So yeah, all good. But no, thank you ever so much. And yeah, LinkedIn, Instagram, just search for Mark Colborne, and yeah, reach out.
Welcome for today's blueprint guest, Mark Colbourne, MBE. I'll use it there. If you've enjoyed this episode, please be sure to subscribe and stay tuned to our conversations wherever you found this podcast. To find out more about New Wales, our work, who we are, to donate or make suggestions, you can go to our website, which is new.wales. Thanks once again, Mark.
My pleasure. Good luck. Take care. Thank you, Simon.
If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and stay tuned for more conversations with people who want to build the future of Wales. And do go and find, like and enjoy new.wales across all your favourite social media channels.